The desert wind howled across the dusty streets of Red Canyon as a lone horseman rode in, dragging behind him a woman no one in town had ever seen, and everyone laughed. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun beat down mercilessly, painting the wooden facades of the saloons and shops with a harsh golden glare. The townsfolk, accustomed to the predictable rhythm of cattle drives and gossip, paused their daily routines. They squinted at the approaching rider, a man unlike any they had ever known. Marcus was a towering figure, his bronze skin gleaming. With sweat under the blazing sun, long black hair whipping in the wind, and muscles rippling beneath the simple leather vest he wore. Behind him, clinging to the saddle, was a small, fragile woman with skin as dark as midnight and eyes so sharp they seemed to pierce through the dust itself. "Who is she?" one of the cowhands whispered, nudging his companion with a grubby elbow. "She's deaf," Marcus said simply, his deep voice calm, unwavering. "Her name is Amara, and she'd do more than anyone here expects." Laughter erupted from the shopkeepers and saloon girls, sharp and mocking. "You brought her into town? The woman can't even speak." Someone shouted. Children peeked from behind wagons, eyes wide, unsure whether to laugh or run. Even the men, usually fearless with guns at their hips, exchanged uneasy glances. There was something about her, the way she held herself, small yet unyielding, that made them uneasy. Marcus ignored the laughter, guiding her toward his modest wooden cabin at the edge of town. Amara walked with quiet determination, her dark dress whipping around her knees in the gusty wind. Her hands gripped the edges of her shawl, and her eyes scanned everything: the rickety fences, the peeling signs, the sun-bleached boards of the saloon. She said nothing, but her gaze was fierce, unafraid, like a storm gathering strength. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cedar and smoke. Marcus threw open the door, and Amara stepped in, brushing sand from her shoulders. She moved carefully, almost reverently, as if every surface held a story. Marcus knelt down and placed a rough leather pouch beside her. Inside were a few essentials: dried food, water, a small knife, and a bundle of thread and fabric. "She can manage herself," Marcus said, straightening. "But don't underestimate her." Outside, the townsfolk whispered, their voices tinged with disbelief. A deaf woman living with him? Why would he bring someone so weak? The word weak lingered in the hot desert air, an accusation that stung more than the sun. Amara didn't respond, of course. But over the next few hours, she began to make her presence known in subtle, astonishing ways. She tidied the cabin with swift, precise movements, stacking firewood into perfect pyramids. She mended Marcus's worn clothing with nimble fingers, weaving the torn fabric into seamless patterns that looked almost like embroidery. Every motion was deliberate, careful, full of intent. By evening, the townsfolk had gathered on the main street to watch Marcus and his new companion. The sky was painted with molten gold and crimson streaks, the air thick with dust and anticipation. Children laughed nervously as Amara approached the small fountain in front of the general store, balancing a heavy bucket of water with ease. Even the oldest, hardest men couldn't look away. "Does she even know what she's doing?" one woman muttered, shaking her head. Marcus merely smiled. "She knows more than you could imagine," he said quietly. "Wait and see." That night, as the wind died down and the stars emerged like scattered silver coins across the dark velvet sky, Amara sat by the fire. Marcus tended the flames, throwing in a few dry sticks to crackle and pop, sending sparks dancing toward the ceiling. She worked quietly with a bundle of fibers, weaving them into intricate patterns. The firelight flickered across her focused face, illuminating her high cheekbones and strong jawline. Though silent, she exuded a presence that demanded attention. Outside, the town slept uneasily, still murmuring about the strange woman in Marcus's cabin. But inside, the only sounds were the fire, the weaving, and the steady, grounding presence of the warrior who had seen her potential before anyone else. And in that moment, it became clear. Amara's arrival was no accident, and Red Canyon would never be the same. No one dared enter the canyon after dark except for her. The week following Amara's arrival had been a revelation, though the townsfolk weren't ready to admit it. Laughter still lingered in the streets of Red Canyon, but it carried a note of hesitation now. Children whispered tales of the strange, silent woman who could stack firewood into perfect pyramids and weave intricate patterns with just her hands. Adults glanced at her with cautious curiosity, noticing how she moved with purpose, how her eyes always seemed to notice what others missed. On the seventh day, the desert wind shifted, and the sky darkened with heavy clouds that churned ominously over the jagged red cliffs surrounding the town. Dust swirled in eddies along the streets, carrying the scent of rain and dry earth. The townsfolk, unprepared for sudden storms, hurried to secure roofs and shutters. Panic rippled through the town when a sudden sandstorm ripped through, bending wooden fences and sending hats and wagon wheels tumbling across the street. "Where's Marcus?" Someone shouted over the howling wind. He was outside, standing tall, on his horse, his long black hair and turquoise necklaces whipping in the wind. But it was Amara who moved with astonishing precision. She darted from one end of town to another, her hand signaling directions to Marcus and the few cowhands willing to follow. With rope and nailed boards, she began fortifying vulnerable buildings. Every movement was deliberate, almost like a silent language the wind itself could understand. The storm's fury intensified. Blinding sand scratched at faces and tore at clothing. Horses neighed in fright, and townsfolk shouted over the roar. Yet Amara's calm presence cut through the chaos. She balanced on overturned barrels to hammer planks over windows. She directed men to stack wagons and hay bales against the windward sides of buildings. Every gesture she made was precise, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. Marcus watched her from his horse, admiration flickering across his bronze face. "She's remarkable," he muttered, almost to himself. "They'll see it soon enough." By nightfall, the storm began to subside, leaving Red Canyon coated in a fine layer of sand. The townsfolk emerged cautiously from their shelters, blinking against the dust and staring at what Amara had accomplished. Fences that had once threatened to collapse now stood strong, reinforced by her ingenuity. Loose boards and wagons were tied down or cleverly stacked to shield roofs from the next storm. Even the children, who had watched from behind barrels and wagons, whispered in awe. "What? How did she—" one grizzled farmer began, his voice shaking. She's amazing," a young girl interrupted, her eyes wide with wonder. "I've never seen anyone do that before." For the first time, laughter was replaced by stunned silence. The townsfolk began to understand that this quiet, deaf woman was no ordinary visitor. She was a force of nature in her own right. She didn't need to speak to command attention, to inspire cooperation, or to save lives. Every movement, every decision, carried weight and purpose. That night, around a fire in Marcus's cabin, Amara carefully dried her soaked shawl and mended the torn edges. Marcus handed her a simple meal, dried meat and bread, and she accepted it with a gentle nod. Her hands moved quickly, tying knots and repairing frayed fabric with meticulous care. She didn't speak, but her expression was serene, almost proud, as if she had anticipated the storm and its trials all along. Marcus sat back, letting the firelight dance across his face, and watched her. "I told them," he said softly. "I told them not to underestimate you. And now they'll never forget you." Outside, the town was quiet, the streets littered with sand and debris, but untouched at its core. In the fading light, children peeked from behind shutters, and adults stood in their doorways, nodding silently at one another. They had witnessed something extraordinary. A woman who faced the fury of the desert and emerged not only unbroken, but victorious. And in that moment, Amara's presence became more than just tolerated, it became respected. The first real shift in Red Canyon's perception had begun, and Marcus knew the challenges ahead would only serve to reveal the depth of her courage, intelligence, and strength. In the storm's aftermath, the town slept uneasily, aware that life in the desert was unpredictable. But now they had seen that some forces, quiet, steadfast, and invisible to the tongue, could bend even the harshest elements to their will. And it was Amara who had done it silently, impossibly, without a single word. Flames erupted across the town square as a lightning strike set the old mill ablaze, and screams pierced the smoky air. Red Canyon was suddenly consumed by chaos. Smoke curled into the sky, blackening the sunset, while the wooden mill, the town's only source of flour, crackled and groaned under the fire's relentless heat. The townsfolk froze in terror, their eyes wide, hearts hammering. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, and men gripped rifles, uncertain how to stop the inferno. Panic was infectious, spreading faster than the flames themselves. Amara moved without hesitation. Her dark skin glistened with sweat from the scorching heat, and her sharp eyes swept over the scene, calculating, organizing. She didn't speak, yet her gestures were precise and commanding. With a quick motion, she directed a group of cowhands to line up buckets of water from the nearby river, while signaling others to pull wagons closer to shield adjacent buildings from sparks. Her silent authority cut through the fear like a blade. Marcus, perched on his horse at the edge of the square, took in the scene with pride. The fire was fierce, yet he trusted her instincts completely. "Follow her lead," he called, his voice booming over the roar, though she didn't need to hear him. The town's defenders moved like a single organism, responding to her every sign. The heat pressed against their faces, the smell of smoke thick in the air. Sparks flew across the wooden roofs like tiny comets, and flames licked at the edges of crates and barrels. But Amara's calm determination held steady. She coordinated the townsfolk to form a human chain, filling buckets and dousing the fire before it could spread to nearby homes. Each motion she made was deliberate, unhesitant, and astonishingly effective. One of the youngest cowhands tripped, dropping a bucket, but Amara didn't falter. She dashed forward, guiding him with a firm hand on his shoulder and a sharp point toward the next bucket. Panic melted from his face, replaced by focused determination. Others followed her silently, mimicking her actions, inspired by her fearlessness. Amid the chaos, a stack of hay caught fire, threatening to ignite the neighboring stable. Without pause, Amara sprinted across the square, water in hand, and smothered the flames before they could spread. Her agility and courage stunned everyone who had doubted her capabilities. Mothers and children peeked from windows, mouths agape, watching the silent woman command the survival of their town. Hours passed like minutes. Sweat ran in rivulets down Amara's face, her clothes soaked and singed at the edges. Still, she worked tirelessly, coordinating, dousing, and guiding her, every movement precise and efficient. The townsfolk had long ceased to mock her. Instead, they followed her lead with a reverent awe. By nightfall, the fire was contained. Smoke curled lazily into the darkening sky, leaving the charred remains of the mill as a grim testament to the storm's fury. But no one was hurt. Not a child, not a man, not a single horse. The town had survived, and it was because of her. Marcus dismounted and approached her, brushing ash from her shoulders. "You've done it again," he said quietly, eyes shining with pride. "They'll never forget this." Amara, silent as always, simply nodded, her gaze moving from the smoldering mill to the people of Red Canyon. She didn't need their praise. Her satisfaction came from seeing order restored, lives saved, and fear replaced by courage. The townsfolk, still trembling from the ordeal, began to murmur among themselves. "Did you see how she moved?" one said, awe in his voice. "Like she knew exactly what to do, like she was born for this." "She's not ordinary," another whispered, eyes fixed on the woman who had tamed the fire without uttering a word. Even the children, who had once laughed at her silence, now stared in admiration, whispering, "She's amazing." That night, Red Canyon was forever changed. The townsfolk had witnessed not only Amara's brilliance but her unwavering courage under the most extreme danger. And Marcus, sitting by the fire beside her cabin, understood something deeper. She wasn't just surviving the town, she was shaping it, silently, impossibly, with strength no words could convey. The town had faced fire, wind, and fear, and in each, the deaf black woman had proven herself unstoppable. Her presence, quiet yet commanding, had begun to rewrite the very story of Red Canyon. And as the stars shimmered over the desert, Marcus knew the challenges ahead would only reveal more of her extraordinary power. A caravan of ruthless bandits arrived under the blistering afternoon sun, their horses snorting and guns glinting in calloused hands. Red Canyon had grown accustomed to the desert's hardships, sandstorms, fire, and the relentless sun, but nothing could prepare the townsfolk for this. A dozen riders, faces masked with scarves, thundered down the main street, boots kicking up dust, eyes scanning for weak spots. They carried pistols and rifles, weapons gleaming as they demanded gold and supplies, threatening to burn the town if their demands weren't met. Panic spread immediately. Mothers clutched children, men reached for rifles, and the blacksmith froze mid-hammer, his face pale. The once lively town square became a tableau of fear. Marcus, shirtless and imposing, bronze skin gleaming, long black hair flowing with the wind, stood beside Amara. Tribal jewelry glinted on his chest and arms, catching the sun as he calmly assessed the threat. His eyes never left the bandits, but his focus was divided. He knew the town itself depended on Amara's quiet genius as much as on his strength. Amara's dark eyes scanned the scene, taking in every detail. The uneven fences, wagons that could be toppled as barricades, narrow alleyways that could funnel the riders, and the frightened townsfolk who could be mobilized as defenders. She raised her hands, making swift, deliberate gestures, signaling Marcus and the men to take positions. Every motion was clear and exact, a silent strategy that transformed fear into organized defense. The bandit leader, a burly man with a jagged scar across his cheek, laughed cruelly. "You think you can stop us, little town? Hand over the gold and we might let you live." Amara didn't flinch. Instead, she ran to a stack of barrels and began tying ropes, positioning them as tripwires. Along the narrow street, her hands moved with astonishing speed and precision, and the cowhands began following her instructions without hesitation, moving wagons and stacking hay bales exactly where she indicated. Marcus mounted his horse, moving to block the main entrance, while the others hid behind the barricades she had orchestrated. The tension was palpable. Every rider knew that one wrong move could trigger disaster. But Amara's calm focus radiated over the defenders, instilling confidence that no words could convey. The first bandit tried to force his way past the barricade, but a hidden rope tripped his horse, sending him sprawling into the dust. Another charged the alley, only to find a cleverly stacked series of wagons forcing him to halt abruptly. Panic and confusion rippled through the intruders, their confident swagger faltering under the unexpected coordination of Red Canyons. Defenders. Amara moved among the defenders silently, checking barricades, adjusting positions, signaling men to shift just enough to gain advantage. Her knowledge of terrain, timing, and physics became a weapon more powerful than rifles. The bandits, unprepared for such strategy, faltered at every turn. Marcus's voice boomed, unneeded but reassuring, as he intercepted the bandit leader. "This town isn't for the taking," he shouted. The bandits hesitated, unsure how to proceed against the combination of Marcus's raw strength and Amara's calculated genius. By the time the sun began to dip behind the canyon cliffs, the invaders had fled, spurred by fear, confusion, and the relentless precision of Amara's silent leadership. Red Canyon stood victorious, not a home burned, not a citizen harmed. The townsfolk emerged from hiding, mouths agape, eyes shining with awe. Children clung to mothers, women whispered excitedly, and even the men who had doubted her now nodded in respect. "Did you see that?" one muttered. "She didn't even speak a word, and yet we won." Marcus dismounted beside her, brushing ash and dust from her shoulders. "I told you," he said softly, turquoise beads catching the fading sunlight. "She's unstoppable when she sets her mind to it." Amara simply nodded, her dark eyes calm, surveying the town square now free of threats. She did not need accolades. Her satisfaction lay in the survival of the people she had silently commanded to victory. That night, Red Canyon slept cautiously but confidently, a town transformed. They had faced fire, wind, and now a human threat, and each time it was the deaf black woman and her warrior protector who ensured their survival. The bandits' retreat had left a lesson in its wake. In Red Canyon, bravery could come in silence, courage could wear no words, and intelligence could outmatch brute force. And so, the town's perception of Amara shifted yet again, from curiosity to awe, from mockery to respect. She had not only saved lives, she had rewritten the rules of what was possible for a single person, even in the heart of the unforgiving Old West. No one had ever asked Amara where she came from, but when the river flooded, she told them everything without a single word. The rains had come unexpectedly, swelling the desert river until it threatened the wooden bridges and low-lying homes of Red Canyon. The townsfolk scrambled to secure livestock and reinforce buildings, panic flashing in their eyes. Mothers gathered children, men shouted instructions, and the air was filled with the constant roar of rushing water and the sharp scent of wet earth. Amara moved calmly, stepping through the mud with the grace of someone completely at home in chaos. Buckets, ropes, boards, every tool became an extension of her body. She directed townsfolk with sharp, precise hand signals, pointing, gesturing, guiding, as if she had spent a lifetime understanding the world through observation and instinct. Her instructions were silent, but the people of Red Canyon followed. Without question, after the floodwaters receded and the town's homes and livestock were safe, the townsfolk gathered in the main square. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed, while adults whispered in amazement. Marcus, leaning against the post of his cabin with his long black hair fluttering in the cool evening breeze, watched Amara with pride. "She's incredible," one of the older men muttered. "I've never seen anything like it." The flood gave Amara a quiet moment by the riverbank. Kneeling, she dipped her hands into the rushing water, letting the cold current wash over her palms. She wasn't just surviving. She was reflecting, remembering a life she had fought to leave behind. Born hundreds of miles away, Amara had been forced to flee a life of cruelty and oppression. She had grown up in a town where her voice was ignored and her presence dismissed. Being deaf, the world often assumed she was powerless, but every hardship had strengthened her mind and sharpened her instincts. Survival had become a language she understood fluently, and every gesture, every look, every precise action was her way of speaking volumes. It was this resilience that, Marcus had seen the moment he found her wandering the desert, alone and shivering, under the relentless sun. He had recognized her potential, not weakness, and had chosen to bring her to Red Canyon, to a town where she could finally thrive. And now, after storms, fires, and bandit threats, her presence was impossible to ignore. Children approached her cautiously, watching the patterns she traced with twigs in the wet sand. She smiled faintly, nodding at them as she guided their hands, teaching them to build small dams and miniature flood barriers. Mothers gathered nearby, learning from her silent expertise, realizing that every motion, every strategy was a lesson in foresight and intelligence. Even the men, those who had once doubted her courage, now sought her guidance when repositioning wagons and securing fences. Marcus joined her, kneeling beside the riverbank, his tribal jewelry catching the last rays of the sun. He didn't need to speak, his presence alone was a reassurance. Amara glanced at him and offered a small nod, her gratitude unspoken. Together, they surveyed the river, noting where the currents were strongest, where the town's defenses had succeeded, and where they could improve. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the Red Canyon cliffs and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the townsfolk gathered around the square to share stories. They recounted the recent flood, the bandits, the fire, and each time Amara's name rose in their conversation, it was accompanied by awe and admiration. They no longer saw her as merely the deaf black woman Marcus had brought home. They saw her as a savior, a strategist, a force who had transformed their town in silence. And in the quiet moments, when children were tucked into beds and lanterns flickered along the streets, Amara allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She didn't need applause or recognition. Her joy came from knowing that the town had survived, that lives had been protected, and that for the first time in her life, she was seen not for her silence, but for her strength, intelligence, and unwavering heart. Red Canyon had begun to understand that the impossible could be achieved by someone brave enough to rise above fear, prejudice, and the limitations the world had once forced upon them. And in that understanding, Amara's place in the town and in its heart was finally secure. The quiet of Red Canyon was shattered by the distant howl of hooves under a moonless sky. Night had fallen, draping the Old West town in shadows. Lanterns flickered weakly along the main street, casting long, trembling silhouettes on the weathered wooden buildings. Most of the townsfolk were asleep, exhausted from days of floods, fires, and bandits. Yet not everyone rested. A new threat had emerged, a ruthless gang of outlaws determined to take what the town had earned. They moved silently, their dark silhouettes barely visible against the canyon cliffs. Eyes glinting with greed. Marcus, perched atop his horse near the edge of town, scanned the darkness. Shirtless, bronze skin gleaming in the pale moonlight, his long black hair whipped in the chill night wind. Turquoise and bone tribal jewelry glinted as he flexed his muscles, preparing for what he knew would be a fight for survival. Beside him, Amara crouched low, her sharp, dark eyes reflecting the lantern light. Though silent, her mind raced with strategy, and her gestures quick and precise signaled readiness to Marcus and the small group of town defenders. The outlaws crept into the street, confident in their stealth, unaware that the town had learned from every disaster that had come before. Amara's eyes scanned every alleyway, every rooftop, every shadow. She motioned silently, guiding townsfolk to reposition barrels, tripwires, and wagons, creating an intricate maze that would trap intruders. Each motion was deliberate, every hand gesture a command that turned fear into organized defense. One of the outlaws kicked a loose board, sending it clattering against the side of a saloon. The sound seemed deafening in the still night. Marcus's eyes narrowed. With a subtle nod to Amara, he He nudged his horse forward, muscles tense, ready to intercept. But it was Amara who set the trap. She had guided 2 young men to hide behind stacked wagons, each holding buckets of sand ready to blind the intruders. Another group held ropes, ready to trip the horses. The first outlaw stepped into the trap. A bucket of sand flew, stinging his face, and he stumbled into a hidden rope that wrapped around his horse's legs, throwing him into the dirt. The others froze, confusion and panic spreading. Amara's gestures moved quickly from one defender to another, signaling shifts in position and timing that the outlaws couldn't anticipate. Marcus charged forward, intercepting the leader, his raw strength and imposing figure striking fear. The outlaw swung his knife, but Marcus dodged with the grace of a predator and knocked him off balance, his tribal jewelry glinting under the lanterns. Amara, still silent, moved through the shadows, her presence felt rather than heard, her gestures coordinating the town's defenses as if she were conducting a symphony of survival. By the time the moon dipped behind the canyon, the outlaws had been routed, some fleeing in terror, others captured and bound by ropes under Amara's careful supervision. Not a single townsfolk had been injured, thanks to her foresight and tactical brilliance. Exhausted but unbroken, Marcus and Amara stood in the middle of the now quiet street. Lantern light flickered across Marcus's bronze skin and flowing black hair, highlighting the strength and courage that had protected the town. Amara, her dark eyes calm and unwavering, surveyed the scene, satisfied that her silent strategy had triumphed once again. The townsfolk slowly emerged from their homes, whispering awestruck words. "She planned everything," one said. "She didn't even have to speak, and we survived the night." Children peeked from behind windows, eyes wide with wonder, while adults shook their heads in disbelief, finally understanding that the quiet black woman and the Native American warrior were not just protectors, they were the heart and soul of Red Canyon. Marcus dismounted beside her, brushing ash and dirt from her clothing. "Another night survived," he said softly, turquoise beads catching the faint starlight. Amara's subtle nod was the only reply, but it carried the weight of victory, intelligence, and unwavering courage. That night, as stars shimmered above the desert cliffs, Red Canyon slept with a new sense of safety and trust. They had faced darkness, danger, and greed, and once again, it was the deaf black woman and her warrior protector who had ensured their survival. The impossible had become reality, and the town knew that Red Canyon would never again be underestimated or unprotected. The morning sun rose over Red Canyon, painting the desert cliffs in shades of gold and crimson, but the town was still tense. A storm of a different kind approached, not of wind or fire, but of whispers, judgment, and disbelief. A rival gang of ruthless outlaws had returned, larger and more determined than before, emboldened by tales that the town's defenders were weak. They believed that the black woman and her warrior protector were no match for them. They had underestimated what Red Canyon had learned in the previous days, and they would pay for it. Marcus, shirtless and powerful, his long black hair flowing in the desert breeze, stood at the edge of the main street. Turquoise and bone tribal jewelry glinted on his bronze skin, catching the sunlight as he flexed his arms in preparation. He surveyed the town, his eyes sharp and calculating. Beside him, Amara adjusted her shawl and scanned the street, her dark eyes piercing the distance. Though silent, her mind worked at lightning speed, anticipating every move, every tactic, every mistake the outlaws might make. The gang entered, guns raised, horses snorting in defiance. They were confident, ready to take what they thought was an easy prize, but Amara had already prepared every detail. Wagons were positioned to funnel the intruders into narrow corridors. Tripwires and hidden obstacles awaited every step. Townsfolk, previously skeptical, now stood behind barricades, ready to follow her silent commands. With a subtle gesture, Amara signaled the start. Marcus rode forward, his imposing presence enough to draw the first attackers toward him. Muscles tensed, tribal jewelry catching the sun, he blocked their path with expert precision. The first bandit fired, but a bucket of sand, expertly tossed by a hidden defender under Amara's direction, blinded him temporarily, causing his shot to miss. Amara moved fluidly through the chaos, her gestures guiding the townsfolk with uncanny precision. Every wagon, every barrel, every rope had been placed with intention, creating a trap that funneled the bandits into corners, isolating them one by one. The townsfolk moved confidently, following her commands without hesitation. Even the children and women helped, placing small obstacles and buckets in clever positions. The outlaws realized too late that they were ensnared. Horses stumbled over hidden ropes, riders collided with barricades, and confusion spread like wildfire. Marcus intercepted the leader, muscles coiled and ready, while Amara's silent brilliance ensured no escape. Her ability to anticipate each move, to orchestrate every detail without a single word, left even the most ruthless outlaw in awe and fear. By midday, the last of the outlaws were captured or fleeing. Red Canyon had not lost a single citizen. Not a building had been destroyed. Every life was preserved, every victory achieved, and it was all thanks to the silent black woman and the powerful warrior who had stood beside her. The townsfolk emerged from hiding, their eyes wide with amazement. Mothers hugged children tightly. Men nodded in respect, and even the skeptical elders approached, bowing their heads slightly in reverence. "She did it? She really did it," one man whispered. "The impossible. She made it possible." Marcus dismounted beside her, brushing ash and dust from her shoulders. His turquoise and bone jewelry caught the sunlight as he smiled, pride shining in his eyes. Amara's faint nod was the only reply she needed. The gesture said everything. She had faced fire, floods, bandits, and outlaws, yet she had triumphed every time without a single word. The children approached her, shy but eager, offering small gifts of flowers and handmade trinkets. Amara accepted them with a gentle nod, her calm smile speaking volumes. The townsfolk, once laughing and doubting, now cheered her courage and ingenuity, raising Marcus and her as the town's true heroes. That evening, Red Canyon celebrated quietly. Not with boisterous festivities, but with a newfound respect and gratitude. Lanterns glowed in the streets, illuminating the faces of a town that had learned the meaning of courage, strategy, and silent determination. Amara stood beside Marcus, at the edge of town, watching the desert cliffs glow under the setting sun. Though she spoke no words, her eyes reflected satisfaction, strength, and belonging. Red Canyon had learned what she always knew. The impossible could be achieved by someone brave enough, intelligent enough, and steadfast enough to rise above every challenge. And in that realization, the town and the silent woman who had saved it would never be the same again.